As Tom said, I'm an associate professor and co-op advisor at the University of Cincinnati. And over the next 45 minutes, we're going to explore how to build UDL principles and accessibility into your course design from the start rather than retrofitting it later. So this session is relevant to anyone involved in course creation, whether you're brand new to accessibility or you have some experience. So learning outcomes, what I'd like to accomplish by the end of the session today is that you'll be able to compare the time and resource costs of proactive accessibility versus retrofitting approaches. Second, that you'll be able to apply universal design for learning principles and accessibility to create workflows that scale from individual documents all the way up to complete course design. Third, you'll be able to evaluate your course materials and using accessibility checklists and assessment tools. And fourth, you'll be able to create implementation plans for building accessibility into your standard design processes. So everything I share is going to connect back to those four outcomes. Okay, so why accessibility matters? Let me start by explaining that we can't always rely on a reactive, accommodation-based approach to accessibility. The fundamental challenge is that we face that many students that don't disclose that they have disabilities, but they never disclose them to us. So maybe they don't disclose it because of fear or because of stigma, because navigating the accommodation system can be overwhelming and it can be expensive. And sometimes students don't even yet know that they have a disability, especially if it's not something that was diagnosed in childhood. So in addition, we also have individuals that are joining our classrooms from all walks of life. You've got different cultures, different backgrounds, generational differences. You've got first-generation students and so on. So the result of all this is that we simply can't rely on knowing from the outset who needs accommodations and who would benefit from accommodations. So we can't design a course assuming we have all the information that we need and then accommodate individually. And actually COVID-19 taught us that in a big way, right? Suddenly everyone needed flexible attendance options, recorded lectures, and asynchronous content. And so what we have been calling special accommodations for individual students turned out to be to benefit nearly everyone when the circumstances changed in such a big way. So that should tell us something pretty important about how we design courses. So that brings me back to the key point that accessibility really helps everyone, not just the students with the documented disabilities. Think about captions on videos. Yes, they're essential for deaf and hard of hearing students and faculty like me, but they also benefit second language learners who are still building their English vocabulary and may struggle from time to time. They help commuters who are watching videos on public transportation or on the go. And they help anyone in a noisy environment, or maybe they're in a library or a coffee shop. Maybe they've got kids playing in the next room. Having the captions on videos can be very, very helpful. And then also having a clear course structure with good headings. An organization helps students with cognitive disabilities and differences, but it really also helps every student who's stressed and juggling 4 or 5 classes, trying to figure out what's due, when it's due, and where to find the assignment instructions that they need. Flexible deadlines support students with the genuine emergencies and students with chronic health conditions, for example, but they also support the student whose car breaks down, whose child gets sick, or whose parent has a health crisis. Good color contrast is another thing that helps people with low vision, but it also helps anyone who is reading on their phone in bright sunlight, for example, which is all of us at some point, right? So when we build accessibility and from the start, it's not just checking a compliance box, it's creating courses that work better for everyone and for all the messy, unpredictable lives that our students have on a daily basis. And so an example of what retrofitting might look like, and I think we've all been there in this scenario, where, for example, maybe it's week 3 in the semester, student requests accommodations in week 3, and they need videos captioned. And so you suddenly realize you have 8 videos that have already been posted. They do have the auto captions, but it has errors in there because you have technical terminology and acronyms and other things. So you're scrambling now to fix those captions, right? and you discover something else. The PDFs that you scan from a textbook, they aren't accessible. So now you're trying to figure out, can you get that from another source, or can you possibly retype them or something? Meanwhile, you have another student that might email and they ask for alternative exam formats because their accommodation plan doesn't work with the exam format that you've chosen. So now you're creating an alternative version of an exam in the middle of the semester. So this is the retrofitting approach, right? It's reactive, it's time consuming, it's stressful for you and for your students. And you're often creating incomplete or rushed fixes under pressure. And worst of all, you have to repeat it semester after semester with the same process, and sometimes with different requests from different students. So you end up maintaining multiple versions of the same content, and that in itself can become its own burden. So just an idea of the cost comparison when you look at retrofitting versus proactive design. And so I know that time, at least for me as a faculty, I'm assuming for all of you as faculty and designers, that time is just your most valuable resource, right? And I think the retrofitting approach, if you look at maybe you have an initial course design of, let's say, 40 hours, depending on the course type and complexity, accommodation requests received, maybe results in 15 to 20 hours of fixes for each of those. And then you have additional requests during the semester, maybe those are an additional 5 to 10. So repeat fixes for each term, maybe 10 to 15 hours for each. So the total first year is heavy. It's 70 to 85 hours, and that compounds year after year because you're not changing the design of the course. You're just retrofitting every semester over and over. And then you compare that to the proactive approach, which is that the initial course design is actually going to take longer. It might take 50 to 55 hours, which is more than the basic version, but then your maintenance during the semester is much, much reduced to maybe only a couple hours. And accommodation requests, they're minimal because the accessibility for the most part has already been built in. And that compounds every semester. So just a couple concrete examples for retrofitting and design. So if you have video content, and then what you're going to do is you're going to review and edit the auto captions for the videos after the request, which is going to take you additional time. But if you're proactive, you build the caption review into your video creation workflow, which maybe is 10 minutes per video as you create it. For scenario 2, you've got course documents. So retrofitting, you're going back and you're fixing the heading structure and the alt text and the contrasts and a bunch of documents, and that could take several hours. Proactive is using that accessibility template in Word, for example, from the start, which might be, a minute or two per document. And then the assessment alternatives. Retrofitting is creating alternative exams maybe midway through the semester, which is stressful, and you want to make sure that they're measuring equal things and measuring the learning objectives. With the proactive approach, you're designing that flexible assessment options from the beginning, from the syllabus, and it's built into the additional planning. So you've got the same work comparatively, but you've got a completely different experience. You've got one that's proactive, it's less stressful, and it's less time consuming, it's more effective, and it's more inclusive. And to top it all off, students really do notice there's a profound difference between having to request accommodations to participate and being able to fully participate from the start without having to call attention to what needs to change. Student feedback for me has noted the impact of the accessible design. Some say it's the first course where they didn't feel singled out. I had a student mention that they felt like they could fully engage from the start without the stress of navigating the accommodations process. And so I think when accessibility is proactive rather than reactive, students experience belonging rather than just accommodation. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about universal design for learning. So universal design for learning would be that roadmap for how we do accessibility and beyond. UDL was created by CAST, which is the Center for Applied Special Technology, and it's based on decades of neuroscience research about how people actually learn. Here's the key insight. Learners are naturally variable, right? We all have different strengths, different preferences, different needs, so there's no real average student. Traditional course design often works like this. We design for some imaginary average student, and then we accommodate everyone who doesn't fit that mold on the go, right? UDL flips that completely. And instead, UDL sells design for human variability from the start. Build flexibility and multiple options into the original design, not just as afterthoughts. So, and this is really how we avoid the retrofitting trap. We're not designing a course and then fixing it for different students. We're designing a course that works for different students from the first day. And UDL gives us 3 core principles to work with, and we're going to talk about each one of those. So the first one is multiple means of engagement, which is sort of like the why. The first principle is about tapping into learners' interests and motivation. This approach really scales beautifully from the assignment level, where you might offer choices and topics or approaches. Maybe you're teaching a research methods course, and you might let them choose a research topic that connects to their major interests, or their major. At the module level, it scales. You vary your social learning configuration. So maybe you have some work that's on an individual level, some that's in pairs, some that's in groups, just recognizing that students have different optimal working styles, and some do their best thinking alone, and some do their best in collaboration. And at the course level, you build structured flexibility into your policies. Structured flexibility, not chaos, right? So you want intentional options for students. You have clear attendance expectations, but also clear pathways for handling genuine emergencies. So I think the key is connecting content to real-world relevance, providing appropriate levels of challenge, and allowing students to work at their own pace when possible. Each level of the course design reinforces student agency and reduces barriers to engagement, which research shows increases student motivation, participation, and the urge to do well. The second one is multiple means of representation. And this means giving learners various ways to acquire information. So it's the what. And let me show you what I mean. It's the document level. So maybe you are providing both text and visual explanations of a concept. Maybe you're explaining a process and you write it out in steps, but then you also provide a flow chart or a diagram that shows it. At the module level, you're offering the same content through different formats. Maybe you have a reading on a topic, but then you also offer a video that covers the same content. And students can choose which format works best for them, or they can use both if that's what they want to do to reinforce their learning. And at the course level, you ensure that all the media has captions and transcripts, defining specialized vocabulary, using analogies and examples to make abstract concepts concrete. And the goal is the principle stays the same here. You're providing multiple ways to access information and engage with the information and show knowledge of the information, but the application scales very well from the document level to the module level to the course level. And you're not learning something different at each level, but you're just applying the same principles at different scales. So the third one is multiple means of action and expression. So this is how they're telling you what they're learning or what they know. And this means letting learners demonstrate what they know in different ways. This is where it can really be a challenge to separate the learning objectives from the arbitrary formats or what we've chosen as the method for them to demonstrate something. So at the assignment level, maybe students could choose written paper or a presentation or a video to meet the learning objective. Maybe at the assessment level, they could have timed exams or take-home assessments or maybe portfolios. And at the course level, maybe students can even propose alternative ways to demonstrate their learning. But I think the critical question you have to ask yourself is, what are you really measuring? If your learning objective is students will be able to analyze historically accurate primary sources, does that have to be demonstrated through a 5-page paper? Could a student demonstrate that through same analytical skill through a presentation or through a video essay, maybe through an annotated collection of sources? And it doesn't really mean lowering standards. It's just about being crystal clear about what the standard is and being flexible about how students meet it. So we're measuring the learning objective and the analysis, not the format that we've traditionally used to assess it. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was cognitive load theory. I just wanted to give you one more theoretical framework that explains why all this matters for learning and not just for compliance. Cognitive load theory says that our working memory, our ability to process new information is limited. And I like to think of it as a cup that can only hold so much. So there are 3 types of cognitive load. You've got intrinsic load, which is the water in the cup. And that's the content that we actually want students to learn. And then we've got extrinsic load, which is the ice in the cup. That's unnecessary obstacles. And then you've got germane load, which is stirring the water. That's the productive mental effort that students put into learning. So they're stirring, they're processing, they're thinking about it. And this is good. This is students actively processing and connecting ideas and building understanding. Intrinsic load, we also want that. Material is complex because it's complex, and it's the actual content that students need to learn. But the extrinsic load is the ice that's taking up space in the cup and making it difficult to stir. It's unnecessary obstacles that really have nothing to do with learning. Could be confusing navigation. It could be inconsistent formatting, unclear instructions, buried information, inaccessible materials that students can't even access. So I think our goal as designers is to remove the ice as much as we can. We can't reduce the intrinsic load. We don't want to. We can't reduce the germane load because we want students to think hard about the material, but we absolutely can and should reduce extrinsic load. And that's exactly what accessibility does. Clear structure, consistent navigation, accessible documents, good contrast, descriptive links, all of these remove that extrinsic load and they clear up space in students' cognitive cup for actual learning. Okay, so looking at accessibility for your materials at the document level. Let's start with Microsoft Office. This is something that most of you probably use, and you already have an accessibility checker that's built into Microsoft Office products. And the tool catches most common issues. It's located, if you look under Review, under the tab at the top, it says Review, and then check accessibility. And then you use this tool that will catch most of the common issues that you need to be aware of. So missing alt text on images, missing heading structure, color contrast problems, missing table headers, and reading order issues are the most common things. And the workflow you could adopt is before you save a document and upload it to your LMS, run the accessibility checker. Takes a minute or two, and the checker will tell you exactly what's wrong, and it even gives you tips on how to fix it. So this really becomes your first line of defense to scaling up. You're catching accessibility issues before they ever reach the students, and you're not uploading inaccessible materials that you'll have to fix later. Okay, so the next level would be the LMS level. Here at University of Cincinnati, we use Canvas. And so for Canvas, you are running the built-in accessibility checker. You click the accessibility icon in the rich content editor on each page, and it's a little human that's at the bottom, and it's going to come up with the issues and assist you with fixing those issues on the page level. You can also do global Canvas checks where you can do an accessibility report for a whole course. You find that in settings, and it shows you which pages and items have issues. It prioritizes high impact issues. It actually gives you a score. You can also validate links in the content in the settings to make sure that all your links are working as well. And I think really the key is to use the tools proactively, not to wait until you get an accommodation request, but these reports can be run on your courses now. They can identify issues and you can start to systematically fix things. And then I think there are some comprehensive checklists out there that are beneficial. The gold standard is the WCAG or WCAG checklist, and they use the POUR acronym. And WCAG is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I know probably everyone's aware of Title II and what's happening, which makes WCAG very relevant. But they have guidelines on their website. There are international standards for web accessibility, and the checklist organizes these standards around the POUR acronyms. You've got perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So first is perceivable. Can users perceive the content? If someone can't see it, can they access it through a screen reader? If someone can't hear it, can they access it through a transcript or captions? O is for operable. Can users navigate and interact with your content? Can they use it with the mouse? Can they also use it with the keyboard? Because they should be able to do both. And then U is for understandable. Can users comprehend both the content and the interface? For example, is the navigation consistent? Is the content clear? And then last is R for robust. Does your content work with assistive technologies both now and in the future? You can download this checklist on their website, and I've referenced it. I have some references at the end of my presentation. And so I would recommend saving it and using it to audit your courses systematically. CAST also provides a UDL checklist that evaluates how well your course implements all these UDL principles. And they have a ton of resources on their website. So I've also listed that as a resource at the end of the presentation as well. So I think between these two checklists, that gives you a pretty good framework for evaluation. And then you've got automated testing tools. There are many free browser-based tools out there that you can use to check your materials before students encounter problems. So one is Wave, the Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool. It's a browser extension for Chrome or for Firefox. You install it, then you can visit pages on your Canvas course and click the Wave icon, and it shows you where accessibility issues are on that page, and it's really useful for like quick checks. The color contrast analyzer is another option that I use, and it checks whether the text in the background have any accessibility standards issues, what the contrast is like, and you can use an eyedropper, or you can actually put in like the hex code for the colors, and it will tell you what the ratio is and if they pass or fail. And then something that I'd really encourage you to try if you haven't is a screen reader resource. There's several out there. One is NVDA, which is free and open source. I would really encourage you, if you haven't, to download it, actually navigate through to one of your Canvas pages using only the screen reader, and then without looking at the screen, have it read everything. And it's really eye-opening. I think if you have any issues on your page, you're going to immediately understand which design choices help screen reader users and which create barriers. The tools are all free, so you can download them, use them regularly, and you'll catch issues before they become problems. Okay, and then for scaling accessibility, so you go from the document to the module to the course. And that's the workflow that I use, is starting at the document level, you learn the basics, heading styles, alt text, checking contrast, running the accessibility checker, all those things. For one document to start off, it might take you more time, maybe 15 minutes, but then as you get used to it, it's going to become automatic and part of your workflow that you check the accessibility of the document before you save. And at the module level, you're going to apply those same principles to the module content, and you're going to add in that consistency and navigation and structure across the modules, caption all the videos in the modules, and it might take 1 to 2 hours to start at the beginning, but then as you get used to it, it becomes, again, part of your flow. And it really depends on how much content you already have, and starting at the document level is going to make that so much easier. And then at the course level, once you finish those things, you can actually create a course template, which I have, that is accessible, and you can just reuse that template from semester to semester, and just make sure that you're checking things and looking for anything that's updated or outdated. And you can build flexibility into your policies from the start: attendance, deadlines, participation, all those things. And then you can set up accessible systems for submission and feedback and engagement with the material. And I think this is the biggest lift, with much more than needed initially for your first course, but then after that, it gets much easier as you continue to do it over time. And then you can reuse that template for future courses. Each level builds on the previous one, so you're not starting from scratch each time. You're systematically building an accessible infrastructure. And I think once you have an accessible course template, once you develop the habits, then ongoing maintenance is minimal. Okay, so just a couple before and after examples. You've got the syllabus. And if you have a syllabus, this is often the student's first experience with the course. And if it has a lot of dense paragraphs with embedded due dates, policies that are mixing with content descriptions, if the formatting is inconsistent, if you've got important info that's buried in different paragraphs, and then there's no clear visual hierarchy for students to follow, it creates additional extrinsic cognitive load. Students are spending mental energy, they're hunting for things instead of understanding the content that's on the syllabus. Where are the due dates? How do I contact the professor? What happens if I miss the class? They're reading and rereading, and they're searching for information, and it causes frustration. The after version is where you've got the clear heading hierarchy, you've got due dates in a simple table, you've got consistent formatting throughout, not only the syllabus, but throughout the course. You've got important information that's highlighted. Maybe it's in a call-out box or it has a specific heading. The flow is very logical. It goes from overview to the schedule to policies to resources, maybe. And then it's like it's the same content, right? But it's a completely different experience for students. The after version helps everyone. The overwhelmed student juggling with four courses, anyone reading on their phone, screen reader users, students with ADHD or anxiety, and honestly, anyone who's just having a rough week, it makes it easier. So another example is the link text. The before version might look something like this. For more information about assessment guidelines, click here. To see examples, click here. To submit, click here. And the screen reader experience is where they're just getting link, link, link over and over and over. The screen reader has no idea where those links go, and they have to navigate each one, activate it, and see where it goes, and then back up if it's not the right place where they want to be. The ACT version might look something like this. Review the assignment guidelines, explore example submissions, and submit your work through Canvas, where each of these things is actually the link. And the user knows exactly where each link goes before they click it. But this doesn't just help the screen reader users, it helps everyone who's scanning a page quickly. I can find the submit your work instantly when I'm looking for something in the submission portal. And descriptive link text is better for SEO, which is search engine optimization. And it's better for everyone, and it takes 30 seconds to fix. Another example is heading structure, and I think this is really kind of what I call the invisible problem. I think things look very organized visually, but when you are using a screen reader, it can be devastating if headings are not used in a constructive way. Might look perfectly organized on screen. You might have the large and the bold text for the section titles. You might have clear structure all the way down. But the problem is that if you haven't applied the actual heading styles, if you've just manually made the text big and bold, screen readers can't detect that structure. So then what screen readers are having to do is navigate through one continuous block of text. There's no way to navigate between the sections. So students visually, they can look for grading policies or week 3 assignments or contact the instructor, things like that. But for a screen reader, they have to navigate everything linearly from the beginning to the end. And it's just a lot of time for them to be able to find anything. So using those heading styles, both in Word and in Canvas, is very, very helpful, rather than just making the text bigger or smaller or organizing things aesthetically. I think this impact is really huge for anyone using assistive technology, and it saves so much time and frustration as they participate in your course. Okay, and then captions and transcripts. You've got second language learners straining to understand. Anyone in a noisy environment might miss content. You've got deaf and hard of hearing students that are completely left out if it's not available. And you can't really study efficiently because you can't quickly review just the part that you need, which you're able to do with a transcript. And with captions and a transcript, everything changes. Everyone can follow along regardless of the environment. You have a searchable transcript for studying. You can search for a specific term and jump right to where it's located. And comprehension improves for complex technical terminology because users can see it on the screen as the captioning goes by, and they can see it spelled out. They have the option to watch without sound if they need to. I have students that follow the transcript or read the transcript after they watch the video. And research shows that retention improves for all learners when they have multiple forms of input, so maybe visual and auditory together. And I think the good news is that technology does a lot of the work for us now, right? We've got Zoom recordings that integrate with Canvas and Kaltura. We've got auto captioning. And so all you need to do is just budget the extra time you need to confirm that those captions are what they need to be and to review and fix anything that might be incorrect. And I think when you build that review time into your video creation workflow, it's not an afterthought. It's part of creating that content on a regular basis. I think another before and after example was color and contrast. And I think it's really important not to use color alone to convey information. Maybe the before information says red text for due soon, green text for completed, color-coded calendar with no other indicators. And there are multiple problems there because about 8% of men and a small percentage of women have some form of color vision deficiency or difference, and they may not be able to distinguish red from green, which is the most common. But even beyond that, color-only coding applies in other situations as well. Maybe somebody printed your syllabus out and it's in grayscale and they're not able to access that. Maybe they're reading on their phone in bright sunlight, so the colors are washing out. Maybe their laptop is in low battery mode, and so the display changes. And I think just using color alone isn't reliable in general. So the after version uses multiple indicators. You've got the warning icon next to due soon, the text is bold, you have a check mark next to completed. And so you've got multiple indicators for status, multiple visual cues, not just the color. And it really ensures that everyone gets that information regardless of how they're viewing that content. And then the built-in document accessibility for practical tools. We've got Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, the whole Microsoft Office suite, and using the Review tab and check accessibility. You don't need to buy anything special. You just go to the Review tab and check, and the tool would identify issues and provide specific instructions for fixing them. And there's a whole community online of people and resources as well outside of Microsoft that uses these tools, and they have input and can answer questions. And I think for me, the best practices are just to build it into the document creation and make it a habit before I actually save it or upload it into the learning management system. Using heading styles, adding alt text to images, marking them as decorative if they're purely aesthetic, using sufficient color contrast. The checker's going to flag your colors if they don't meet the accessibility standards. So I think all of these things are important, especially the table headers, and then not saving to PDF. So not scanning, but saving to PDF from Word, so the accessibility format carries with it. And then for video accessibility, again, same situation. The tools are much easier to use now because of technology, but you've got Kaltura, you've got YouTube, you've got Zoom. There's multiple other tools out there that often have auto captions built in. Most universities have captioning teams where you can send it away and get it captioned if you need to, although that does have some turnaround time. And your Zoom recordings, actually, if you're using Kaltura, it will actually record automatically and upload and auto caption entirely by default if you set it that way. And YouTube also has auto captioning available, but again, you have to check to make sure that the captioning is accurate. And so I think the workflow, budgeting per video for captioning, a review, focusing on those technical terms and making sure those are accurate, any names, any acronyms, that's where auto captioning makes the most mistakes. And then testing playback with caption visible and even watching it with the sound off to make sure that the captioning that is there is synchronized and that it's accurate is helpful. And then accessible technology. Before you adopt any new tool, like any new quiz platform, any new collaboration tool, any new video system, I think it's important to ask these questions. Does it work with screen readers? Can all features be accessed via keyboard? Does it support captions and transcripts for any audio or video content? Is documentation provided in accessible formats? Has it been reviewed by your institution's accessibility office? And I think there's a couple red flags to look for. For example, if the vendor says accessibility coming in a future release, that's a red flag because it's not accessible now. It's just accessible in the future. If there's no accessibility statement anywhere on their website, that's a red flag. If the tool requires a mouse and you can't tab through or use the keyboard to go through for interactions, that's a red flag. And if you can't find a VPAT, which is a voluntary product accessibility template, that's the standard accessibility conformance report, and something your accessibility services should know about as well. That's a red flag. And I think if you choose an accessible tool from the start, you're set. You can use it confidently. You can, if you choose an inaccessible tool, you're either stuck retrofitting, coming up with a workaround, where you're excluding students, or you're replacing the tool entirely later because it's not fitting. And none of these are really good options. Your institution probably has a process for vetting new technology for accessibility. So if you're going to use something, it's important to make sure that you check with them. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was something that goes beyond documents and videos when you're looking at the UDL mindset, right? Which is flexibility. Flexible policies. I think accessibility just isn't about content. It's also about how we structure opportunities for learning, which is a big part of UDL. I think it requires a bit of a mindset shift. And I'll give you some examples. Maybe instead of saying students must attend 100% of sessions in person, maybe you think in-person attendance is valuable, but I'll try to provide alternatives for genuine needs. Instead of thinking, if I'm flexible, the students will take advantage, maybe I'll build value into attendance while supporting unavoidable absences, right? Instead of thinking participation equals showing up for a full class, participation could equal engagement with content and peers and provide multiple pathways for them to do that. And it's not really about eliminating expectations or making everything optional. It's about distinguishing between what's truly essential for learning and what's just tradition or habit or expectation. Can students achieve the learning objectives through alternative means? And if they can, why not try to build that in from the start rather than handling it as an individual exception later on? So I think when we clearly explain why attendance or synchronous participation matters, most students engage. And the students who miss classes for a genuine emergency really aren't going to take advantage and abuse a flexible policy. They're going to be grateful and more engaged when they return. Okay. And then for implementation planning framework, I think it's important to focus on some quick wins, maybe for weeks 1 and 2, running the accessibility checker on your used documents, adding alt text to Canvas images, replacing click here with descriptive links, checking one video for caption accuracy. These are all high impact, low effort changes, and they take a minute, but they make a real difference. And then maybe for phase 2, you do a systematic audit. Maybe that takes you a month or two. Pick one course, choose one complete course and evaluate it. Using the checklists we discussed and identify the high impact issues, the things that are actually blocking students from accessing the content. Create accessible document templates you can reuse and fix critical accessibility barriers first. And then phase 3 is more of an ongoing thing, but it's about building new habits. Integrating accessibility into your content creation workflow so it becomes automatic. Use accessible templates for all new content, reviewing captions as you create videos, not as a separate task later, and sharing what you know with your colleagues and collaborating. I think the key is to start small with quick wins, then get systematic with your efforts, and then build the habits that prevent future problems. This is how you move from retrofitting to building accessibility from the ground up. And I think even as you move beyond an individual into a community of practice, that's helpful because that collaboration is really key and not having to invent the wheel across classes, across faculty, and across institutions as well. All right, so I think what I wanted to do was just take a couple minutes and just pause and give everybody time just individually to think about the initial stages of your implementation plan. So think about what you could do this week. 2 to 3 quick wins from phase 1, some low-hanging fruit, maybe choosing one course that you'll audit systematically, and identifying some tools or a checklist to use, trying to figure out what you'll build into your regular workflow from the start, or looking at any resources you need or who can help you. So I think starting to think about that for a little bit is important. So I just wanted to take a minute or two and have everybody jot down some things individually, and then we'll come back together. And of course, if anybody wants to share in the chat, you're welcome to do that too. Thanks for indulging me. Sometimes I feel like that's the most difficult part is figuring out where to get started. And I think just taking a moment to do that can be very helpful. Okay, so few common pitfalls to avoid that I wanted to talk about before we wrap up. We've got perfectionism paralysis, which is something that I see often. I can't make it perfectly, so I'll wait until I know more, or I'll start tomorrow. I'll give it some more time. And I hear that a lot. There's just generally it's difficult to get started. So I think starting with high impact issues or low hanging fruit and just improving incrementally is important. Progress doesn't have to be perfect. I think you've got the retrofit trap. And so looking at that, it's waiting to see who needs accommodations. And I think that we've already talked about that and why that doesn't work very well. So, building accessibility in from the start is important. Aesthetics over function, which I think can be a struggle for instructional designers. This design looks beautiful. I don't want to give it up, but testing it with assistive technology is important. I think if it's not functional, it's not working. One and done thinking. I made it accessible once, I'm finished. Instead, I think both accessibility and UDL, they require ongoing maintenance as things are constantly changing in the educational world. So those are just the few of the pitfalls that I see on a regular basis that people fall into. Okay, and then here are some resources that we talked about for your toolkit. We got the CAST UDL guidelines. We've got the WCAG checklist, the Wave browser extension. I didn't put a link for the Microsoft Accessibility Checker because that's built in. The color contrast analyzer and the NVDA screen reader. Again, these are just some of the options that I use. There are multiple options out there that you can choose to use that are available. Great resource is your colleagues, the Disability Services Office, your accessibility team, instructional design team if you're a faculty, and then the faculty working with the population of students if you're an instructional designer. Okay, and I think just to reiterate, proactive accessibility saves time and resources. Building from the ground up is easier than retrofitting, and small workflow scale to complete courses. I think really accessibility benefits everyone, not just students with disabilities, and really it's good pedagogy, not just compliance. All right, and I think that's all I have for you today. I did want to note that when my presentation is sent out, I do have multiple slides, literature resources at the end, and then some general resources if those are interesting to anyone. But yeah, so let me go back and see if anybody has any questions.